Hello and welcome to the live stream. Today we're going to be talking about some of the new announcements that Apple announced this week at WWDC. I'm not going to go through everything. There are plenty of other folks doing that out there, but specifically I'm going to be talking about a couple of the devices, or a few of them, and specifically how they relate to content creation and live streaming, and really a little bit selfishly the way that I'm thinking of them for my ultimate setup going forward. Just as we speak, I'm already seeing that my processors on my little M1 Mac Mini are kind of almost maxing out again, so it's just the right opportunity to get a case of the gear acquisition syndrome. So I'll be talking about some thoughts that I've got on to future upgrades in that respect as well. Hi to everyone who's tuning in. Hey Chris in the chat, great to see you here, and obviously the fine folks in the Discord backstage. Look at that, my overlay out of place right from the beginning. Great stuff. Okie dokie. So the first thing I'm going to talk about is the last thing that Apple announced, which is really the biggest announcement of WWDC, which was the Vision Pro goggles. And I think they've just sort of knocked it out of the park with this, to be honest. I know that there was a lot of sense of shock, I should say, with people watching this live when the price came out at $3,500 for a what people are calling a VR headset. It's actually far more than a VR headset, though, isn't it? In fact, it's more like augmented reality, because what it is doing is it is actually laying stuff over your view of your environment. So this is what they look like on a person wearing them. And you would think that this is actually sort of semi-transparent, that, you know, you can see through to the people's eyes. But what is absolutely amazing about this is actually the full front of it is in fact a screen, or at least part of it sort of behind the glass, I should say. And that is actually not the person's real eyes, but rather a projection of the person's eyes to give the illusion that they are looking out of the device. There's so many things about this that are actually really creepy as well, which I'll get into a little bit later. But just from a technological point of view, what they've achieved is pretty amazing. And what this is doing is, when you're looking through the goggles, you are seeing a projection into your environment. And the crucial thing here is that just as you can't see into it from the outside, actually, when you're wearing them, you're not looking out at your real environment, but rather it's got a whole array of cameras that are looking at your environment and then projecting that onto the screens that you're seeing in your eyes. It's pretty mind-blowing stuff, and by all accounts, from the very few people who have actually tried this on, and there are very few people who have done that in the tech press world, they've all said that the eye tracking and the sort of realism that they've got from it is on another level. It is actually, really realistic, which is something that has let down a lot of these devices in the past, where it looks like you're looking through, sort of tunnel vision. But let's take a little look at the device in a bit more detail. So if I come over to this scene here, you can see that this is what it looks like from the front. You can also see then that there are these sort of faint little cameras down here that you maybe can't see too easily. But if we tilt the device up, then there you go, you've got cameras on the sides, on the bottom. You've also got cameras here that are looking down, because the way that you interact with this device is through movements of your hands. So hand gestures for, pointing and swiping, but you also interact with it with your eyes. So if I just come back to this shot for a moment, maybe we need to put this into context in terms of what you're actually seeing. This is how you would be looking. Let me just come here for a second. I'll just go through all of their things. This is basically what you could potentially be looking at in your field of view. So you're seeing your actual environment, but you've got all of these different virtual windows. So potentially, no more massive banks of monitors. You could be looking at all of these different windows and apps in effectively floating in free space. Although, as I say, it's actually just a video of free space that it is projecting back to you. Then you have got to think, well, how are you going to interact with this? And this was the point I was making, that it's done by eye movement. So, you are essentially just looking anywhere on the screen. And if you look up at a field that you want to enter some data in, you can just look at the field and it knows where you're looking. And then you can either dictate it, or, you can still use a keyboard with this. There is also kind of like a virtual keyboard. You can kind of see it there in that shot, in fact, just in front of them, floating in free space. So I can imagine they didn't specifically show show this, but being able to just sort of type on this virtual keyboard, and it is tracking your hand movements. And then also there's a whole series of other sort of gestures that you can use to control this with as well. So they made a big point about this, actually, that these new devices that Apple has released, there have been some key innovations that have made these things possible. And they talked about, the mouse with the Mac, and then obviously multi-touch with things like the iPhone and the iPad and so on. But then with this device, now it's all about these gesture controls. So it is a kind of completely new way of computing, and of course, just the eye tracking. And as I say, by all accounts, first impressions are that the eye tracking is exceptionally good, as we would expect from Apple. So let's carry on looking at the sort of walk around of the device then. So as well as these different cameras, then you've also got the straps that hold it onto your head. One thing about this is that people were concerned about was the weight, and it is quite a large device. However, once again, people have said that the few people who have tried it on have said that it has been relatively comfortable, or very comfortable, I should say, certainly for the time that they've been using it. Now you can see on the bands here, it does have some speakers here. I would guess that you can use these with headphones as well, rather than just these things that are right next to your ears, so that you can have a more personal experience. And then you've got the headband. And although it's not shown in here, there is in fact an over-the-top headband as well that goes on to add that extra bit of stability. But this is the one that sort of holds it onto the back. You've got that little adjustment wheel there to move it around. This is where it gets interesting, though. What's going on inside. And as you can see here, you've got these two different lenses there, or those two different screens. If you do need eye correction or you wear glasses, you can obviously wear contacts with it, but you can actually get custom-made lenses that will pop into there as well to correct for your eyesight. Next is what they call the light seal, this thing around the front. Then in terms of controls, you've got the digital crown there, so similar to the type of input device that you'll find on the Apple Watch. This is for adjusting things like the level of immersion that you've got. So whilst we've shown how this sort of fits into your environment, where you can see your whole environment in the background, you can also fade that out if you want and have a completely immersive experience where you're not actually seeing any of your environment as well. And apparently the digital crown can be used to sort of zoom that in and out. So if I come back to here again, we've also got a top button, which is for power and things like that. And then in terms of power, there is a attached battery pack, and it clips onto the side here. And then that runs down to a small battery pack that can power it for up to 2 hours, apparently. But then there is also a socket on the power bank that you can then plug in directly. So if you just want it sort of tethered in that sense, then you can do that. Obviously, this is a first generation device. So as with all of them, it's a bit like when the Apple Watch came out, the first generation Apple Watch or the first generation iPhone. They were a bit lacking in terms of things like power and functionality and all of that kind of stuff. But it was a first step on that path. And obviously, quickly, they evolved from there. And so this is very much, a Gen 1 device. And I don't expect massive widespread adoption. However, I think it's going to be really compelling for a lot of people. However, there are also some aspects to it that I just find really quite odd. And just coming to the use case as well about this, I mean, we've shown that it is, for, you can view your windows, and I've just shown this particular thing. But also it is for, viewing movies and that kind of thing. So you could have your whole sort of cinema effect going on in your living room. And then also for things like video calls. And this is the first thing that I found really quite odd, because they made a whole sort of play on this and how you can use this for your Zoom calls and things like that. However, they were showing you in a meeting where, you're basically seeing all of the other people out there in front of you, and all the way through them talking about this, I was wondering about, well, what are the other people in the meeting seeing if you are on this device? And this is where it gets a little bit creepy, because what they've done is you can sort of scan your face, and then it is going to create almost like a personal deep fake of yourself, and that is projected into the meetings. And the eye tracking is going to, adjust the eyes. They're going to, I guess, somehow be looking at your expressions as well. And so what the people on the other side of the meeting are seeing, if you're watching, if you're in your Zoom meeting wearing this, is they're actually going to see a almost like a virtual representation of yourself. So I'm going to be really interested to see how that actually looks. But the whole concept of it to me just seemed like really quite creepy. And the other thing about this is they showed lots of things where, the majority of the demo was a woman sitting down in a sofa wearing this on her, on wearing the thing. And then they were showing like family members would come in and then, they would just sort of appear into view as they got close. Whereas if they were sitting further away, they wouldn't be in view. And I did kind of feel like, yes, I can't see this initially being something that's going to be, a real inclusive family experience. They also talked about how all of the cameras that you've got on board, you will be able to take, immersive 3D videos as well that you can then watch back in the device afterwards and have the full sort of 3D effect. I'm not sure that I'd want to be playing with my kids wearing one of these to capture, family moments. But as I say, this is only a Gen 1 device. So it obviously over time, this thing's going to get, or these, kind of devices are going to get much smaller, much slimmer, and just in the same way that all of the other Apple devices have done as well. But yeah, certainly from the outset, it's not something that I can see sort of integrating in the same way that me and my wife and kids sit down with the kids and play whatever games it is that they want to play, and we'll play together like all on our iPads or whatever. They've got me into Roblox recently, so playing some kids games, and that is fun because you feel like you're still interacting with each other. You're sitting right there next to each other. You can look at each other. Yeah, I don't think it'd be quite the same experience with a set of goggles like these on. However, from a professional point of view, I mean, 20 years ago, when I was in the aerospace engineering field, we were using stuff similar to this, although nowhere near similar to this. And also it cost about 100 grand a piece. But that was a device for 3D CAD. So actually wearing a virtual headset so that you can do engineering design and you can manipulate, 3D models, but actually get inside to see, the way things are interacting in, wiring looms or precision pieces of engineering. And it was, that kind of application. Certainly, this is, very going to be very useful for those kinds of applications where you do actually want to manipulate things in 3D space. And, my background in architecture as well, I'm used to doing that, manipulating 3D objects with a 3D mouse, controlling, the other things with my other mouse. Well, now, if we could do a lot of those kind of applications, those kind of works, those kind of jobs with this 3D headset, certainly there is a big opportunity there. And so when you talk about the sort of price point of $3,500 or whatever it was thereabouts, for me, that did not come as a surprise at all. And when you look at what's actually inside it, let me go to this other view on the Apple website because it's quite amazing. And I'll just come back to this one for a second. Just incidentally, this sort of shows off what you are likely to see in your sort of view. So you can adjust, where your sort of field, your field of view is. You've got apps there that are just sort of floating in virtual space. It's just really, really amazing interface, and I can imagine it's going to look great. But if I just keep scrolling down here, this is where we see what is going on inside. And as I say, it isn't completely transparent. You don't see through it in any way. So although they call it augmented reality, it is really, a projection of the outside room rather than stuff like Google Glass, for example, where you did have a set of glasses and it was projecting things onto the top of your natural vision. This isn't doing that. This is filming the environment and it's projecting it onto the screens, which are then you are then looking at. And here you can see what's inside. So they've got the outer glass. They've got this thing here, which is basically the screen that the people from the outside are seeing what's going on inside with your eyes. Weird. And then here you've got the sort of heart of it, which is where you've got the screens and the processing on board. Because inside here, you've actually got an M2 chip. So when we start talking about the price, I'm sure they're not making any profit on this in terms of just what's gone into it. To have an M2 chip in there, first of all of this different array of sensors that they've got. These are, as they say, very sophisticated sensor array. They've got to be to do what they're doing, and especially these ones here with the eye tracking as well, to be able to see exactly where you're looking and project things. They're doing some really really interesting stuff here in terms of the resolution and quality. One thing that lets down these kind of virtual devices, and sometimes people say they feel motion sickness and things like that, is a combination of, first of all, the thing not doing what you're doing. So obviously, if you move your head, it's got to seem like you are literally looking in that direction. So that's the first thing that could let this down, although by all accounts it doesn't. And the other thing is the frame rate as well. So this has got a frame rate of, I think, about 82 frames per second, something like that. So yeah, it's not going to give you the motion sickness, but there is a lot going on here. And as I say, I can see where all of these things lead into the cost. But here you can see it's got the M2 chip in it. Amazing that this is in a set of goggles. And then it's also got the R1 chip, which is a new chip that they have designed that is specifically bringing together all of these different sensors and doing all the things that are specific to this particular device. And the privacy thing as well, it can do retina scans as well. So that is how you activate it. Just putting it on, it's going to recognize who is watching or who is using the device. Yeah, it's a pretty amazing device. I'll certainly be trying one out for sure because it's kind of like the next step. I think that this is where things are going to go. Certainly not with this Gen 1 device, but I can see how how this can evolve in the future. Let me just quickly check in with the chat. Hey, Lester, great to see you here. Hey, Keely, great to see you too. And a Mac Studio. Indeed, yes. This is what I've been debating, Lester, is the Mac Studio or the Mac Pro, and I'll talk about the difference between those a little bit later. And yeah, the XR hybrid between augmented and virtual reality. And it certainly is that because it's kind of virtual reality. It's a virtual version of actual, the reality that you're augmenting over the top of. And yeah. So I want one so badly, but $3,400 have some serious justifying to do. I know the thing is, it is obviously a Gen 1 device, but I think that it's going to be an interesting thing to be at the head of in terms of seeing how this development goes because it's only going to be become more prevalent in lots of things. The eye tracking indeed has been around for decades, and it's great to see in a refined small space like this headset. Yeah, the thing of what Apple tends to be quite good at, not always, they sometimes do completely miss the mark, is they're not necessarily always first to market on these things, but when they come to market, they've generally got something that is a step up from the other things in market competitors. Although in this case, significantly more expensive than some of those. Hey, great to see you here. Thanks for stopping by. And Mac Rumors, hi MarineX. Mac Rumors is reporting a Vision Pro with mystery USB-C adapter spotted in WWDC. Yeah, I mean, if they've got the power bank that comes off it, it has the USB-C socket in that you can then tether it to the to your mains power. And I know a lot of people were saying, well, are they going to allow third-party power banks if you want to have using their proprietary connector that they've got on the side? Are we going to see third-party things being able to lock into that? I'm not sure that they're going to open up that connector necessarily. However, given that the power bank's just got a USB-C socket on to plug it into mains power as well, then technically any other power bank would be able to plug into that too. So I'm not sure if that's what you're referring to, though, by the way, MarineX, but nevertheless. So Vision Pro next model naming, Vision Pro Ultra and Vision Pro Max. Yeah, there's no end of options for them there. But yeah, it's really interesting to see this as a new device, and I'll certainly be giving one a go. They're not out until, when is it? They said early next year, so that could be anywhere from 1st of January till end of June. However, it's probably more likely to be sort of March, April time, but we'll see how that goes. The thing that I'm most interested, though, about in the announcements was the new Mac Pros. And I say Mac Pros, I'm also talking about the Mac Studios as well, because those are, let's not forget, pro devices. So when the Mac Mini came out, I was just talking with Jeff in the Discord just before we jumped on here, and we were talking about the M1. And, you know, when we got the M1, it seemed like it was just lightning fast compared to anything else. But these days, mine does seem to get clogged up quite quickly in terms of the processing, in terms of the processor. When I'm doing things like this, you know, live streaming, I'm also going live into Discord right now, so I've got that going. I'm doing screen sharing and various other things, which is typically more processor intensive as well. And then when it comes to doing things like Zoom workshops and so on, or doing things where I'm using Zoom ISO, bringing different people in, really, I'm pushing the the M1 Mac Mini to its limit, and yeah, so it's time to think about an upgrade, especially to be, you know, talking about the best ways to do things. I'm certainly not using the correct equipment for some of the things that I'm doing. So the Mac Studios then came out, when was it? Just, I guess, last year. And those basically added a lot more power to the Mac Minis in any case. So taking the M1 chip from the Mac Mini and then having the M1 Ultra, which was, is it the M1 Ultra? I might be getting the name wrong now. I'm getting mixed up myself with names. But it basically gave a lot more power on board. And the Mac Studios really are pro devices. Let's not make any... Let's not get this wrong, that these are pro devices. Even though they don't necessarily have pro in the name, they are certainly pro devices. Well, now what they've done is, as well as upgrading the Mac Studio, and let's just take a look at the Mac Studio, as well as upgrading the Mac Studio with the M2 Max, so it's now got the M2 chip and the M2 Max, which is a sort of larger, more substantial chip than the M2. They've also got the M2 Ultra, which effectively is two M2 Max chips joined together. I mean, they've not just glued them. It's a part of the printed circuit board, the architecture of them. But it's basically got two of those together. Well, now they've also added the Apple Silicon M2 chips and the M2 Ultra chips specifically into the Mac Pro as well. And I've heard a few people saying that, well, it seems like now the Mac Pro is overpriced because it's basically, you know, they can have the same chips as the Mac Studio, so why would you have a Mac Pro? Well, there is a good reason for this, and this is the expansion capabilities that you've got. Because one of the key differences between the Mac Pro versus the Mac Studio is, although, yes, they can have the same chips, and in fact, if we come to the Mac Studio, you can see it's obviously, you've probably seen this all by now, but it's about double the thickness of a regular Mac Mini, but it's got more connectivity at the back. The other thing that is different about this is it's just got a lot more power in it. Here with the M2 Max, M2 Ultra. Come down here, let's take a quick look on the inside. I mean, when you look at some of these stats, by the way, it is just kind of mind-boggling. You know, up to 15.8 trillion operations per second. Yeah, it's quite amazing. Support for up to 5 displays, up to 10 streams of 8K ProRes video feedback, and so on. I'm not going to go through all of the specs of all of these. I should say that, you know, any one of these Mac Studios is going to be, you know, more than ample for the majority of people doing any live streaming. In fact, I would argue that probably just the you know, M2 series Mac Minis with the you know, the higher spec is going to be fine for the majority of people. But I'm coming from an M1 and do need to think about the upgrade, and some of the things that I'm doing are going to be pushing even those Mac Minis to their technical limits, or at least, you know, if I want to future-proof for the next 12 months. Here we're looking at the Mac Studio with M2 Ultra, where they're talking about how much faster it is than these different chips. I don't know why they still compare it to the Intel chips, to be honest with you. That seems a little bit redundant now, comparing it to an Intel iMac. We all know that the M series is just, you know, massively more powerful. Here's what we've got inside. That's the reason for the big amount of space that you've got on the top of it. It's all for the cooling fans that you've got inside. If we look then at the Mac Pro, one thing that I was really interested about with the Mac Pro was the fact that, if I find the picture, it's not just available as a desktop, but they've also got a rack-mounted version. And effectively, you can think of this as a Mac Studio in a case with a lot more cooling, but then also this is the crucial part here, the PCI expansion slots that allow you to plug in extra expansion slots. And I'll talk about expansion cards, I should say, and I'll talk about what you may want to put in there, or what I may want to put in there, more to the point. But if we have a look at the tech specs, and here's the rack-mounted version, by the way, it's got the same sort of milled aluminium front, I guess it's aluminium, I'm not sure exactly the material. We've got the same material, the same milled look on the front as the desktop version, but this just slots into a rack being a standard thing that you use to mount electronic devices. I was already thinking of building a rack-mounted system, and I'll talk about that in a moment. And so this may well actually be what I use instead of that. And when we look at the cost of the Mac Pro versus the Mac Studio, if we see the Mac Studio here, I've got this comparison up. So you've got the Mac Studio and then the Mac Pro here. Then there's the Mac Mini as well. But they actually have very similar configurations. So if we look at the M2 Ultra of the Mac Studio versus the M2 Ultra here, it's the same M2 chip, 24 core, 72 core GPU, 76 core GPU, sorry, up to 192 gigabytes of memory, up to 8 terabytes of storage. All of this looks very similar. So you are really, getting a Mac Studio in a Mac Pro case. But as I say, there are some added benefits specifically with those upgrades. Here again, the memory options, 64 gig. This is for the Macs, so 64 gig for the Ultra, 128, 192. Again, this is for the Macs rather than the Ultra. So if you compare the Ultra Mac Studio to the Mac Pro, they are pretty much like for like in terms of those specs. The same here in terms of the hard drive configurations. Support for the same number of displays. But like I say, the Mac Studio is very much a pro device. So don't think that they're letting down the pros by not giving the same in the Mac Pro. The Mac Pro is basically now, from my mind, just a different enclosure for the Mac Studio with that expandability. So when it comes to the rack-mounted system then, and let's take a look at the prices. If you just have the sort of base spec Mac Studio of the M2 Ultra chip, then it's $399. If you have the exact same configuration on a desktop, then it's $699. So yeah, there is $3,000 different there for that exact same chip, the same memory, the same storage, and so on. But it is for those expansion slots. That is what people are going to be buying this for. If you don't need expansion slots, essentially you don't need the Mac Pro. The Studio is going to be still just as much of a powerhouse. When it comes to the rack-mounted option, that is adding some extra. I'm not quite sure of the reasoning for that additional cost there. Maybe it's just the limited run, but that is quite a significant upgrade from $699 up there to $749. So an extra $500 for that. I guess there is some extra sort of hardware. If you look at the gallery here of this one, then I mean, it does look beautiful, doesn't it? You've got the sliders there to slide it out of the rack. This is what it looks like on the back. There you can see that we've got the Thunderbolt and USB sockets there on the back, and the HDMI. And then you've got all of these slots here, which is where you can add in all of your expansion. I mean, it looks beautiful from the back, doesn't it? Even you're not really going to see that, but it does look nice. But here is the inside. So it looks very similar to the desktop version of the Mac Pro with these slots, and some of them are single height. And then these ones down here, you can see there's a bigger gap between them. These are double height. So some cards that you may use in this, some of them are sort of deeper in terms of, or the height of them is higher. So that gives you space to add those in. I did also just want to comment on, do you remember when computers were all just a mass of different chips and components? I don't know if you ever used to build PCs or even Macs in the olden days when you could do that, and they were a lot more customizable. There was usually a lot more sort of things going on in here. This looks very much like, there's very few things in here. There's a couple of chips in here that you can see, but I was just struck by the sort of minimalist appearance of, how this looks overall. It just looks stunning inside and out to my mind. And there's the accessories. So I need to look at those for the time being. So what am I talking about in terms of what what you may want to plug into these? Well, as I say, I was looking at creating an updated system for my studio, and I was actually looking at creating a racked system. And what I was looking at doing before this was announced was I was looking at the Mac Studios. And the reason I wanted to create something with a rack was just to bring in all of these different things, rather than having lots of different devices, lots of different docks all over the place, and a jumble of wires. Just have something in a neat little enclosure. And there's a company called SonnetTech, and they make something. If I come over to here. By the way, if you go to the SonnetTech website, they do have this performance expansion for the new MacBook 2023. Sorry, Mac Pro 2023, as I just cough for a second. And here are some of the things, just to give you some ideas of what you might want to put in here. So you may want to have just a load of extra storage in there, up to 64 terabytes just directly in the enclosure. We all know, probably if you've spent any time around Apple, that Apple's memory is typically very expensive compared to general market prices. So this could be a way that you could get a lot more extra storage in at a lot lower cost than just getting it directly from Apple. And also just the upgradability that you've got there. That's obviously another thing with these PCI expansion slots, is the ability to swap things out and upgrade as you go. High-speed networking as well, 25 gigabit networking card here. This is a big one for me, is the USB-C expansion card. So we all have had issues, I guess, with docks at one time or another. Keely, who is in the chat and in the Discord as well, just yesterday setting up her Streamer X. There was an issue with plugging it into a dock, and then suddenly it didn't recognize the camera, and the fix was to unplug it from the dock, plug it directly into the computer, and then magically when plugging it back into the dock, it was recognized again. And that wasn't anything to do with the Streamer X. That would have been to do with the bandwidth or whatever over the USB bus from this particular dock. And what you have to remember is, even if you've got a powered dock, you've usually just got one single cable going into your computer. So you are sending a hell of a lot of information potentially. And if you get into sort of daisy chaining different docks together as well, you've got a hell of a lot of information going over a single cable. I know that I've done a bit of a rewire of my studio, and now I've found that the performance of some of my peripherals is suffering because I've obviously got things plugged into slightly the wrong combination, and maybe got too much stuff going over one particular USB bus. So having separate things that are plugged directly into the computer in the PCI expansion slots, with, for example, 8 separate USB sockets, giving you 10 gigabit per second over each port directly in over its own bus, is something that's going to be really useful when it gets to plugging in all of these peripherals for live streaming and virtual events and things like that. But I digress slightly. These are specifically just on the Sonnet Pro website, sorry, SonnetTech website, and you'll see that that's right on the front page. But what I was looking at though was these devices that they've got, which is, where is it now? If I come to the right device. It is here. Let me have a look. This one. So this was a rack mount system that they provide for the Mac Studio. So this is again from SonnetTech, but here you can see just behind this grill there is a Mac Studio in there, and then this provides an expansion card slot that can give you up to 3 different PCI expansions cards. So the way it works is you can slide this part out here. If you take a look inside, there's like a gap there, and you can slide this separate module in, and it's got 2 cooling fans in the front, but it allows you to plug in up to 3 PCI expansion cards, much like we can do now in the Mac Pro. So I was already looking at this as a rack mount system for the Mac Studio. Now, when it comes to pricing of these are, here we go, for the Mac Studio with the Echo 3, which gives you 3 card expansion slots. That's already $1,500 just for that, before you've added in the Studio and the cards, obviously. But now comparing that to the difference between the Mac Studio and the Mac Pro that we looked at previously, now that differential in price is not looking actually that bad if you were going to be looking to do something like this. So as I say, it was previously, you know, $399 up to to $699 is the jump up from the Studio to the Pro, but you are getting even more expansion card slots than this. And when I was thinking about expansion card slots, as well as obviously the USB-C that I've just mentioned, the main thing that I'm talking about, or that would be using this for, would actually be for, if I can come over to it, these things, the Decklink Quad 4K. So if I go to the right page, it might help. Right scene, rather. Let me switch over to this. So this is the... My eCam seems to be lagging. It's my computer that's lagging. It's not eCam, by the way. But if I just come over to this scene here, when it switches, as we wait for my my computer, you see why I need a more powerful computer now. This is not switching. Let me try to do this. Let me do this the old way, the manual way. Where is this scene gone here? My scenes list. There we go. We're on it. So this is the Blackmagic Decklink Quad HDMI capture card. And this is allowing you to plug in up to 4 HDMI inputs, but they then go into your computer and you get to see all of those different cameras individually. And this solves one problem that you have if you're using multiple cam links, for example, or indeed if you were going to use multiple streamer X's. So maybe you're going to use that for one camera and cam links for the other, is that you've then got all of these different devices that are plugged in to your computer. You're taking up more USB sockets to then just bring in all of your different camera feeds. So I'm using, obviously I've got my main camera here. I've got a couple of others around the studio as well. But then also for feeding in things like, you know, a presentation from a secondary computer, for example. There's lots of reasons why you may want to have more HDMI inputs. So the Decklink Quad 4K actually solves that problem by giving you this card that then brings all of those 4 devices in as one single feed. Now, I was looking at adding a couple of these in actually because I wanted to route the HDMI from up to 4 or 5 cameras, but then also, as I say, from secondary computers and different devices that I'm testing out as well. So having a couple of these in one of those Sonnet devices to then use it with a with the Mac Studio would be one solution, but just having these directly in the Mac Pro would also just be a lot more of a much more efficient way to do that. The other things that you may want to have plugged in, if I just come over to here, where are they now? If I just get them up, is I've mentioned the Sonnet Allegro. So this is for Type A USB connections. My thing is just really slow. It's typical, isn't it? I'm just talking about the need to upgrade, and my computer is sort of agreeing with me here, it seems. So there is my USB. This is the one with 4 USB sockets, regular USB. This is the one that has got 8 USB-C. And if I come onto this one, this is those expansion things that I was talking about. I'm just trying to see if I've missed anything from here. And these are the different studio enclosures. You can get these enclosures, by the way, for the Mac Minis as well. So I was actually looking to get one of these for my my Mac Mini that I'm going to be obviously retaining as a second device as well. You can actually add those into a rack as well. The other things that I was looking to add into the rack then as well was also, if you have heard of Synology, who make network attached storage devices, they also make rack-mounted versions of those too. And a NAS is definitely something that I need to add into the system. It's not something that I've got around to doing as of yet, but it definitely needs to come sooner rather than later, because I am finding that I'm running out of space rapidly and need to do a better job of organizing all of that. So if I just switch over to here, you can see that Synology do have their full range of network attached storage devices in a rack configuration as well. So it'd probably be something like this that I'd be looking at, a 4-bay, given the size of drives, given how much stuff I need to store. I'm not really needing to get into these big 12-bay things here. So something like this, a 4-bay, is probably what I'd be looking at. And the rack mounting system, these things are measured in U. So 1U is this thing here. So it's kind of like 1 unit. But then these are 2U, so they're double the height, and then 3U and so on. The Mac is, I understand, I think it's a 5U height for the Mac Pro. And then these are 1U. The other thing that I'd be looking to add in as well, because it is important to have solid power going to these devices. So there are a couple of devices there. I already use an external UPS. Well, I've got a few of them actually that are cluttering up the floor. So you can actually get rack-mounted UPSs that are built into the rack system that you're building as well. So if I come back over to here, then this is an example of a rack-mounted UPS. So you would see this on the front, it would tell you your power and so on. And then at the back is where you've got your sockets, and they would obviously connect to the other devices that you've got within that rack. Next up then as well is, especially over here in the north of Thailand, having a power conditioner is useful so that you make sure that you're not getting anything that is going to cause any issues with the tech hardware that you've got put in the rack. And given that we are adding in potentially rather expensive equipment, it's important to make sure that they are protected from that point of view. So a conditioner is actually different to UPS. The UPS just maintains power in the case of a power outage, but the conditioner would go above that, between that and the actual devices themselves, to make sure that that power was delivered consistently. So that is kind of what I'm looking at in terms of a potential system here. Basically, the conditioner, the power, the UPS, then the Synology, but then using the Mac Pro to have all of these cards in. And the cards that I'd have would be 2 of the deck links to have those 4 HDMI feeds going in, or up to 4 per card, and then also the expanding the USB outputs as well, or inputs, so that I can plug in a lot more devices. There is one other thing that I'm looking to do though, because I do things where I'm doing this audio routing from one computer to the next, or potentially from wanting to use the same video feeds that I've got from my cameras, but actually use them in multiple different ways. I'm testing out some hardware devices at the moment for video switching and video routing. So I want to be able to use the cameras that I've got for multiple different devices, for multiple different computers. So something like this, which is a hardware switcher, which gives me access to up to 4 cameras, and then I can switch between them, and it's got a little thing on the front. I'm testing this out. I'll make a video about that in due course. But also things like the ATEM. I'm going to be looking at making some content around the ATEMs a little bit later as well, because I do see where those are a fit for some people. Obviously, I prefer eCam. It just with the power that we've now got in the Macs, the days of saying, oh, well, we need a hardware switcher versus a software switcher because the hardware switcher is more reliable. You don't have to worry about, processor issues and stuff like that, as I'm experiencing right now. But with these more powerful machines, that is less and less of an issue. So I do certainly prefer the software version with eCam. But I have got clients who are looking at doing things where they just want the hardware capabilities of something like the ATEM, or maybe this device, the CineLive C1, which I'm just testing out at the moment. I digress slightly. The point is that I want to be able to route the video from my various different cameras and inputs and outputs, or inputs, and have them going to various different outputs. And there is a device from Blackmagic. So they are the ones that make the ATEM Mini. They make the deck links that I was just talking about. But they also make, if I can find it, where have I put it? They make this thing called the Video Hub. And if I come back to this view, I'm going to give up on my Stream Deck for a moment. There we go. Wrong one, wrong scene. They also make this one here. So it's seeming like it's not switching to that one. They make the Blackmagic Design Video Hub 10x10. So that is 10 video inputs, and it's got 10 video outputs on the back as well. And what that allows you to do is basically route the video to whichever places you want. So you can have up to 10 inputs and up to 10 outputs. They've also got one which is probably going to be a little bit overkill, or in fact, actually, maybe the 20. The 40 is certainly overkill for me. But that allows you to route the inputs So you could have one camera coming in from one source, but then you might have it going out to multiple different sources. So this is this thing of, you know, having a single camera, but I want to be able to use it on my primary computer, but also on my secondary computer, and then also, you know, potentially for some hardware devices as well for testing. And for me, it's for testing, but it's also for demo purposes. So often, you know, you'll see people doing demos where they get this infinity effect, where they're trying to show something on the screen, but then because they're recording the screen, it's doing that sort of whole tunnel vision thing. So I often try and get around that by, you know, running the demo on a separate machine. So I want the cameras coming into both machines. But then also just with some video stuff for video conferences and virtual events, being able to route the video to multiple different places is what these devices are used for. So this is also another rack-mounted component that would go into that ultimate rack there. So, I mean, I've digressed a lot from the Apple products, but I just really wanted to talk about, because we were talking about this in the weekly Q&A in the Take One Tech Academy this week, was, you know, well, what is the use case of the Mac Pro, and have they sort of, you know, dropped the ball by positioning the Mac Pro at, you know, such a higher price, seemingly, but with, you know, very little in terms of additional function, additional power compared to the Mac Studio. And I just wanted to reiterate that the Mac Studio and the Mac Pro are both Pro devices. The people who are buying the Mac Pro will be buying them for this expansion capability. And specifically, I can see a lot of people buying the rack-mounted ones for, you know, things like this in studios, because a lot of musicians have a lot of cards that they need to use or want to use. And so, yeah, having those in their rack with all of their other audio gear, I can see working really well. There was something else that I wanted to talk about in terms of the announcement. There was obviously announcements related to iPad, iOS, and all of this. And there was as well, whilst we're talking about Macs, they did announce the larger 15-inch MacBook Air as well with the M2 chip. So I'm sure that is going to be a powerhouse for the vast majority of people as well. I mean, you know, for most general users, the MacBook Airs are more than adequate. When it comes to, you know, obviously video production and streaming and stuff like that, then you know, it's ideal to have a little bit more power than that. I haven't talked about editing, obviously. One of the things that they talked about in the announcement was just how faster this is at rendering things and you know, producing these edits. And they talked specifically about people using DaVinci Resolve as well and how much quicker it is with that. I'm not really doing all of that. That's my whole thing. Take one tech, take one, no edits. But nevertheless, obviously, it will be a lot quicker for that. And this is when you start thinking about the cost of these things, and sometimes they can seem quite expensive. But a lot of the time, it does really come down to how much time is it actually saving you, and how much is your time worth, and how much will that sort of add up over the weeks and the months that you're using this for before the next upgrade comes along. And that's what it's all about, really. It's like, how much does it actually add value to your business and what you're trying to do? There was one other thing, though, that they mentioned, which was in the new Mac OS operating system. And it was a little feature. Now, I can show you a short clip of this, of what they said, because it's sort of best to sort of see this in practice. But this is something that is relevant, I guess, to, you know, Academy members and my audience, and the sort of things that we talk about on this channel, which is to do with leveling up your online presence in meetings. And it was this little feature. So let's just play this.
Let's shift to ways Mac OS will help you be more productive.
And I'd got it on double speed. So maybe I'll just put it on single speed. I always watch things on double speed, but it doesn't really work well, does it, when you're doing a demo? Let me try that again.
Starting with video conferencing. We spend a lot of time on video calls, but when you share your screen, your face and presence can get lost. This year, we have great new ways to help you present remotely. A new video effect called Presenter Overlay elevates your presence by including you on top of the content you're sharing. With Small Overlay, your face appears in a movable bubble, so it's easy to be seen while showcasing your work. With Large Overlay, you remain prominent while your shared screen is framed beautifully next to you. We separate you from the background and layer your screen in between, so you can walk, talk, and move in front of your content. Thanks to the Neural Engine and Apple Silicon, you get amazing quality.
So I'll just stop it there. But what I loved about that, obviously, is my whole thing about presentations and things in Zoom meetings is that so many times, people are just either they're just on screen, they're just talking to some slides. And usually what happens then is if you are doing a presentation, then you will have the presentation front and center for everybody. And then you will have sorry, I'm just checking the comments. Then you will have your presentation front and center, but then you're kind of like in a little box somewhere. And that's the benefit of using something like Ecamm Live to have a virtual to do a virtual presentation, is that you've got all of the power of Ecamm to bring in different scenes, much like I've got different scenes here in this live stream, and you can take all of that into Zoom. So the question is this going to be something that I'm going to be recommending to almost replace that? And the fact is, it's really not. However, there is some benefit to using this just as a way to augment that. And the fact is that this capability that it's got is going to be something that I think we will be able to bring into Ecamm itself. So almost, as I understand it, because it is almost like a camera effect, we may be able to just bring this into Ecamm. So we'll have to see about that. But you still have the issue here with, although you are in the presentation, you still have the same sort of slightly disjointed nature in terms of, the way that they've got their slides set up. So you'd have to be sure that, you're not going to be over the front of the slides. Whereas with Ecamm, you do have a lot more sort of control over that. And for me, when I'm doing presentations, it's not just about the slides. It's about, and by the way, I don't really do slides. I shouldn't call them slides, because that gives the impression of, a PowerPoint slide with a load of crap, for want of a better word, on the actual slide itself. So I'm much more of the opinion that we should have things where you're just sort of bringing information onto the screen as and when it's needed, and then it's sort of getting out of the way afterwards. Obviously, that's quite a simple slide that this chap has got here behind him, relatively, but I will say that the text is probably a little bit too small, you don't want to get people into this habit of just basically bringing their PowerPoint poorly designed PowerPoint slides into the meeting. It is a great feature, though. I would love to see how it actually works in practice, how easy it is to toggle on and off. Obviously, using something like Ecamm, the ability to switch between multiple different presentations, multiple different scenes at the touch of a button. It's going to be really interesting to see how this does integrate. But for the vast majority of people, it is going to be it's going to be a really easy way to sort of enhance their presentations. And I would say that combining this with something like the Streamer X, which is the new device from Rode, which is a video and audio capture device, or video capture device and audio interface, giving you the ability to have high quality video coming into your meeting, high quality audio, and then the little feature that Streamer X has got on it, which I really love, the ability to control your PowerPoint or your keynote presentation. This combined with this effect could actually be a really nice way to just sort of level up your meetings for a lot of people. Let me just have a quick check through the comments. The Mac Studio, where are we? The Mac Studio can have a max of 6 Thunderbolt 4 ports, while the Mac Pro comes with 8 and PCI slots. Also the SonnetTech Echo Express. That's the external box. So that was what I was also looking at. Obviously I've gone into a lot of stuff since that comment, but yeah, that was the other option there. If you want to get those expansion slots, you can get just an external box that basically plugs into your Mac Mini, and you can have them separated like that. I went down the whole rack route for just another whole reason there. That is where I am in terms of these devices. I am sort of still leaning towards the Mac Pro. I may still consider the Mac Studio, though. We'll have to see about that. I've still not got to finalising all the details and spec'd out absolutely everything. Certainly it will solve my processor issues that I do have with my Mac Mini when I'm trying to do too many things. Like today, for example. Now my processor, by the way, is around about 60%, 70%. But at times during that, it was getting up to more like 95, something like that, which was slowing things down. I'm really interested to try these out, really interested to hear what everyone else thinks. If you've got any comments or feedback about any of the devices as and when you get them, then be sure to come and join the Take One Tech Discord and leave any comments and feedback you've got in there, and obviously your opinions of these devices too. I haven't really covered a lot of the WWDC coverage here, or the WWDC keynote, I should say. This is really just the devices that are top of mind for me. I'll definitely be in line to try out the Apple Vision Pro when they do come out, and yeah, expect to see some sort of new tech hardware in the studio, Take One Tech, very soon. So thanks for coming and hanging out. If you've got any comments or questions, leave them down below in the comment section. That would be a good place. And of course, don't forget to like and subscribe. I always forget to mention that. I'll leave a link though to some other Mac-related videos over here on the right-hand side for people watching on the replay. Thanks to all of my channel members and also to my Academy members too. Great to have that continued conversation with you all. Have a great day, everyone. I'll see you soon.